about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was in China, in Guangzhou, about 3 hours south of Beijing flying time. And we went out on a Sunday night and we went to a restaurant that served 1,000 people. And of course, I ended up on level 2, which was about 400, and I forgot about the other 3 levels, which took to about 1,000. And so they, you walk in and you select your fish, and so they have to do the footprint to include all of that. And they had fish, and I looked at the one that I thought looked like it had been treated the best and was the healthiest. and I selected that one. And then they had a sort of a gaggle of little, really slim snakes that were, silver, and you slice those, and I decided they all didn't look that great, so I passed that up. But the idea of sort of scale and culture and variety is really what we're talking about. And so I offer that up as one difference. We talk about this. Think about 1,000 people and everything that it takes to support a dining experience at that level. That really does reference density in a way that we're not used to it. Think about our interstate when we got started. We never thought it would bring the economic benefit that it has, that it would serve the primacy that it has in terms of making us a world leader, that kind of a decision. So we've made decisions about our future way back that has significant good consequences for us on a going forward basis. And I'm going to make the argument that that's where we are today, and it's another time period for us to think about what those good decisions are. When I started looking and talking about megaregions, which is across state lines and has some other characteristics, I'll talk about it, I went to Georgia Power, and they got all excited. They said, we've been doing megaregions planning for a long time. We serve Alabama and Georgia, and we got Alabama Power and Georgia Power, which is a southern company. So on the private sector side, what we're going to talk about is something they're quite familiar with. It's not something we're so comfortable with on the side of the public sector. And why megaregions? I'm going to spend a lot of time on that. You, I think, will understand some of this, but I want to make it really, really clear and more explicit as we go along. The global economy has a lot to do with it, which I argue we are sleeping by my expectations and hopes for our country. Nonetheless, it's a major mover. And I want to show a slide that references comments by Bill Hudnut, who is the senior fellow at the Urban Land Institute, the largest organization for developers in the world, who attended a seminar we had a year ago where Mayor Franklin and Senator Isaacson talked a lot about the challenges and the abilities of leadership across a multi-jurisdictional geographic areas. And what Bill says is real simple. He says, think global, act mega-regional, and he says why? Urban form is changing, population is increasing, and it's important to think in terms of states and municipalities working together on a larger scale. That's very, very simple. The other thing he says is our problems don't stop at the state line or the city line or the county line. They spill over. And so that was one of the things that he left. And I guess I'll finish that introduction by saying the world is changing, and so must we. What are some implications of that? This is an article, and we all are aware of the water discussions, I'll be polite today, that we're having with Florida and Alabama. Again, a notion of a natural resource, something critical to our continued development, about which we are in significant negotiation. The idea that our challenges are not also confined by political boundaries. One of the pleasant things that came out of our seminars, we had a representative from Nashville, and we were sort of excited. We invited mayors, elected officials from the six southeastern states. Wonderful turnout. Really a lot of good came out of it. And one person came from Nashville and said, what do you mean you have a southeastern mega region and we're not in it? Where's Nashville? And so he went home and wrote an article in the newspaper which said if there's going to be a southeastern mega region, Nashville better be in it. So you're beginning to see some recognition and some understanding on the part of other places that significance of place and their inclusion in that is really, really important. So I got a kick out of that. That wasn't what I had anticipated we would see. Why mega regions? Transportation in 2003, we were the 4th most congested traffic area. Cost us about $1.75 billion, 70.8 million gallons of excess fuel consumption. And of course, we talk about transportation and the horrific status relative to congestion, but there are other sides to it, right? It has lots of implications for health, right? Economic development. So these are all connected. We think about it, we plan it in a sort of silo, but in fact, these are all connected activities. Congestion gets you what? Extra fuel consumption, bad air, bad health. And so it's a continuum, even though we think about it in a very disjointed way. Why megaregions, commodity flows, we imported $2 trillion in goods and services in 2005. We imported $2 trillion in goods and services. 20% of our science and technology workforce are foreign born. We made over 27 million visits outside the U.S. in 2004. We are in the midst of a continuing and prolific wave of globalization that is transforming everything. I had a conversation I'll share with a person in leadership at GDOT who said, Catherine, my challenges now are keeping the equipment owned by companies in Georgia from being sent overseas to China where they can afford to ship it, use it, and still make a bigger profit than if they sit here in the state and pay for it. Globalization affects our ability to construct roads if we could figure out how to get it done, aside from just the question of equipment here in Georgia. Who would have ever think that the Chinese government's demand for machinery would begin to impact our ability to have machinery here to construct roads? Just another example. If you think globalization doesn't touch you, I think you should think again. This is an example of some of our top export countries, and I want to start big because we're talking about mega regions, and I'm going to bring it down to the neighborhood and the city and the community level because it's all of those things. If we look at our top export countries, U.S. exports in 2004 about $818 billion. For us, PAM is 6 states: Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina. We exported about 13% of the total amount that the U.S. Exported. If we look at the U.S. growth from 2000 to 2004 in terms of their growth, their export growth, it was 4.8%. We were 500% more. So those southeastern states increased their export growth times 5 what the United States did. We are a global player. Now, this looks pretty confusing, and I'm going to save the discussion on the left, the top left slide, which is the Bisoto corridor, because I have a larger one I want to dissect for you. But I want you to understand that the phenomenon that we're talking about is one that's being confronted worldwide. It's not unique to the United States. It's not unique to the southeastern United States. And what is it you're looking at? What you're looking at is several visual and spatial representations of how Europe and other places are thinking about their economic, global, mega-region corridor growth that they too are experiencing. So if you look at the top right, the blue banana really links the economic core of Europe based on what Europe thinks. If you look to the bottom right, you see different growth corridors that are outlined. The point is they're saying, look at population, look at where we have high growth areas, look at where we have tremendous problems. How can we leverage that high growth area to help those places that are dying on the vine? And let's think about it in a global way, identifying corridors and nodes and centers, not only in terms of metropolitan Atlanta, but in terms of our country and multiple countries. Same concept, huge difference in scale. About 3 years ago, I got an invitation, 2.5 years ago, that was extended to 15 people in Europe and 15 scholars in the United States to visit the Rockefeller Home, which has since then been referenced as the Pocantico Conference Center, upstate New York, a think tank that really is where the Rockefellers used to live, and the opulence is something I just can't hardly describe. It just is overwhelming, with most of the original arts by the masters still on the first floor. But let me leave that. You can see that impressed me a lot, having not been used to quite that environment. But we got together, and usually when they call us, and I admit I'm a bit defensive about the Harvards and the Stanfords and the MITs, because they usually call us the second or third time. The first call goes out and they're in the room, and the second or third time they'll look south or they'll look west. Well, this time, this is the first call for a really important conference, and I got invited. I thought, aha, there's something going on here. Well, they began to talk about research that had been done initially where they actually forecast population for every county in the United States through 2050. And when they did that, this map showed up. 10 emerging megaregions that we are moving toward this kind of a spatial relationship over the next 30 plus years. Then I thought, aha, now why am I in the room? We began to look at those numbers, and arguably between us and California, Atlanta, the Southeast, the Piedmont Atlantic megaregion is the fastest growing of those. And so not to have us in the room is not to have an intelligent conversation about where the action, most of the action is likely to be. So then I figured out, that's why I got the call on the first time around. Of course, we immediately came back to Georgia Tech, and we did our own numbers. It's not that we don't trust them, but you know how it is. So we came back and did our own population forecast for every county through 2050. Map pretty much the same, some differences, but this kind of an analysis, this kind of a forward look is what's framing the megaregion, the evolving megaregional structure in the United States. It has gone since then to be quite, I'm kind of blown away when I think about what started. European Union people stood up and talked about their experiences in Europe. We all sort of heard that and vowed to go back and align ourselves with our MPOs. We worked really closely from the beginning. Chick and Tom, staff have been very much involved. Tom even went to Madrid with us when we went. Have been very much involved in this. Same relationship in each of 10 of those. Now bringing elected officials in so we can start something we call America 2050. That is now, and Chick referenced it, going extremely well with lots of involvement and leadership by the MPOs, the mayors, et cetera. So I want you to get an idea that this phenomenon that we're looking at, and you might not be surprised that these places are the places that are growing. They don't stop, they're not disconnected, they just get bigger, and they're going to be the place where 70% of us are going to live. The terminology is somewhat confusing, and if you believe a picture is worth 1,000 words, so do I. So I thought we'd start pretty simple, just trying to communicate a little bit about some of these concepts. Think on the left, the mega region or the mega city is any city. Right now, we actually have one meta city, that's Tokyo, 20 million plus. The others are mega cities. Typically, when we say a mega city, we mean 10 million or plus. That too leaves us off, with the exception of Los Angeles and New York. We don't have that. But that's the world vocabulary. What we're doing is framing what does it mean for us within the context of those 10 mega regions I just showed you. We got to figure that out. China doesn't care. They got 10 million plus, right? India. But what is the American counterpart to the phenomenal growth that we're experiencing? That's a part of our challenge. So if you look at this notion of mega city or mega region, let's go to something that we call megapolitan area. That gets defined by the census. That is a matter of look at where the corridors go, the transportation, connected up, who lives, and that's kind of how it gets defined. Mega region can be the site that encompasses a city, a corridor, which we see here, and a sphere of influence shown in gray that talks about who lives around that place. So it's much larger, much more inclusive. The socio-political, cultural pieces of that become very, very important, your ability to analyze that and understand that. We argue that it's this area of influence that explains why there's an affinity among those 6 states, why there's an affinity among Cascadia and Seattle, why the Texas Triangle works like it does. So try to keep just those conceptually, those things in mind. I was talking to Paul Farmer, who heads up the American Planning Association. Myself and Robert Yarrow, Regional Planning Association, a number of others made a presentation at a national conference about 6 weeks ago. And Paul, whom I know very well, stood up and said, "Oh, Catherine, we know we're growing. We've known this for years, and so what does it all matter? What does it all mean, and what's different?" And I said, "Paul, what's different is we are. We're not planning for us out here. We're planning for a whole new generation of people who don't look like us, don't necessarily talk like us, don't necessarily want to live like us." And if you're tracking what's happening in the real estate market, we know that market has changed. That's not true only within cities. That's true throughout our urban areas, our metropolitan areas. So we have a different stake right now. Let's talk about what we call, and we have named, and it's really funny because the Piedmont Atlantic megaregion got its name. This is a benefit of jumping out first. At a class in Georgia Tech, and now every time anybody talks about it, overseas or otherwise, it's called the Piedmont Atlantic megaregion. So we've had the benefit. And a number of people who were in that class now work for ARC, were really instrumental in sort of helping us figure out, and for obvious reasons, right, Atlantic and the Piedmont. But in any event, that is how we are identified. So when you see that anywhere you will, that's what we're referencing. So look, if you will, at the major cities, which I've talked about as mega region, mega city. Look at our corridors, our primary megapolitan corridor, which would be Birmingham, Atlanta, Charlotte, and Raleigh. Look at the relationship of those, our port cities. And what you'll notice very quickly is that we stop around Jacksonville when we get to Florida. There's a big argument that, in fact, Jacksonville is much more like the rest of those, and Miami and South Florida has a huge South American orientation and is a fundamentally different region. Remember, I go back to what I said about the socio-political culture, that it is fundamentally different than the rest of us. And so you see a mega region that references Miami, South Florida, and a huge orientation, if you will, to South America. In my usual optimistic, good old Georgia, Atlanta way, every challenge, every issue offers both opportunity and challenges. What are some of those, if I look across that, those 6 states, if you will? Growth, we've already talked about that. Consumption, we drink more and we consume more land than anybody. We're not so great on degradation either, but I won't talk about that for a moment. Disparities, rich and poor. Infrastructure, we all know, we I think are leading the nation in terms of really inadequacy for infrastructure, given the growth we know is coming. Competitiveness, the global competitiveness, underwritten now, as you're going to see, increasingly by huge investments in infrastructure that provide connectivity to new markets. So the global competitiveness, the regional competitiveness is another issue. And there are tremendous issues in fragmentation tied to our strong preference and insistence that everything is local. First, foremost, and last, and you pay a price for that. And that price is going higher as the economy and the world economy has changed. The idea that those 6 states, the population will double in 50 years. So take this room, put twice as many people in it, and figure out the problems you got then that you don't have now. It's a very good analogy for what is confronting us. Issues facing Pam, what I want to do now is to take each of those 6 issues and talk very quickly about what those underlying challenges are, then some notion towards solutions, and then hopefully maybe some discussion. We are the place to be. In all the conferences that we've had, when we talk about mega regions, everybody is heading south, and not just south, they're coming southeast, and not just southeast, they are coming to Atlanta. And I think this is a great example. We had 2.9 people move between 1995 and 2000. About slightly over half of those moved from the rest of the country. The others were from international community. But look where the width of the line denotes the magnitude of growth, or the magnitude of people that moved to our region. And so you can see the Great Lakes, no surprise. My own personal Cleveland, my city, which is would love to have our growth problems, let me just say. Cleveland, Ohio, tremendous loss of population there. New England, Boston, which I will admit to me has come as a bit of a surprise in terms of how fast they too are facing a depleting population, folks actually moving south. Mid-East, we lost a little bit to the Rocky Mountains, and I can't figure that one out, and I don't know quite who went. But in any event, if you look at that, it gives you some idea that the extent to which we're losing folks, that's kind of where it's going. I want to do just a visual experiment with you now, just for a moment. I talked about this megapolitan corridors, the observation that cities and MSAs are really growing together, just like our cities and our suburbs, no difference. So let's look at sort of the Charlotte, the Birmingham, Atlanta, Charlotte, Raleigh corridor. Then look at Nashville and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that's sort of running north-south in this picture. This is a 1973 relationship of those MSAs. This is 1983, same MSAs. 1993, same MSAs. 2003 MSA boundaries. With the exception of a county or two, we are a continuum. That used to be true only for Boston, Washington, New York corridor. That was the Bosch-Wash corridor was it in terms of megalopolis. Now you got Los Angeles and you got Atlanta. You got this whole corridor that we're talking about now with exactly those kinds of challenges. So the question becomes, if I say, raise your hand, what kind of governmental structure, institutional structure, organizational structure do we have to plan at this level? None. And that's the level at which none, absolutely none. Why does it matter a lot? Oh, we've talked about that, but let me make a point. We're going to reconstruct about what, 84 billion, and maybe it's 90. The point is, if these people come, we've got to house them, we have to educate them. It's all new construction. Do we go out and build what's on the ground now? Do we make Atlanta exactly as it is? The Atlanta Regional Commission's geographic, the 13 counties, the 24 to 32, we do it the same? No, we got to do it better because we got to do it better because we know how to do it better, and we're doing it for different people. So one of the biggest issues is as we construct this new environment for this new population, how does it happen? What's important? Are they willing to live with the lack of mobility that is confronting us, given the kinds of resources we are not spending on solving that problem? 1993, a snapshot of a small subdivision in Fulton County, southeast. And you can see there's a subdivision right here in the southern corner. And if you go very quickly to 2002, you can see now it's a morass of subdivisions, all unconnected. I mean, you got to get out and drive everywhere. You know, there's none of this connectivity that we all talk about. It doesn't exist. So it's working havoc even in our subdivisions, which is a problem. But the other idea is that the per capita consumption for us is 0.67 acres per person, while the U.S. is only 0.36. My idea that we consume more water and land than almost anyone. High rates of rural poverty. I put this up because everybody thinks all the poor people live in the city, or live in the metropolitan area, or live in the inner ring suburbs. Not true. We have huge incidences of rural poverty, if you will, in our country. And this gives you some example of that, and in the Southeast particularly. About half of all of the counties in the 6 states have 20% or so poverty. But if you look from the 41 to 60% in the third level down, if you look sort of west to east, you see a continuum of poverty that goes all the way up right through Raleigh, Durham area. So this idea of poverty operating both in the rural areas is something that I think, and that's why we got to think megaregions. How do you take the high growth areas in our 6 states and help these areas that are very poor and where there's little or no employment opportunity? How do you make that happen? That's the advantage in terms of strategic planning and thinking across spatial geography, those kinds of boundaries, so you can help think strategically about that happening. Now, I thought an interesting comparison would be to look at what is our notion of sort of urban poverty. And so you take each dot equals 1,000 people in poverty, then we just drop the city on top of them. So you can sort of see cities in poverty. It just gives you a spatial sense of, if we look at urban areas, those cities, those dots, what in fact happens there. The 6 states, about 12 million people live in poverty. Infrastructure, my favorite topic, or one of my favorite topics, because it's so critically important, I think, to our continued success, and we know it's been the key to our past success. If we look at change in mode share by weight between 1993 and 2002, it's always interesting to do the 6 states versus the U.S., so that's kind of how I decided to structure this analysis. Just the change in mode share in the United States for truck was about 23%. Those 6 states did 31%, so we're ahead of the U.S. in terms of trucks shifted carrying our freight. Rail, we had a negative 35%. Now, why do you all think that is? We had a negative 35% shift. Because we don't have any what? Rail, right? Right? You can't move it if you don't have it. So you can't use it if you don't have it. So while we have a 21% shift in the U.S., we have a negative 35 in the 6 southeastern states. And lastly, let's look at air transportation. Because we have no rail, I suggest that is why you see the great discrepancy with 20% U.S. and then 88% growth in mode share in air commodity movement over the same time period, because for us, that's the only option. As you know, it's a pricey option as well. So just some observations about what's happening relative to freight. VMT increasing faster than population. If you look at the 6 states, we had about a 2.8% annual change in population. Overall, all of us between 1982 and 2003 are traveling 70% more. Per capita, there's a 70% increase in the amount of trips we're making over that 10-year period per person. And about 20 years ago, Bell South came to us and a couple of what they call we thought were futurist thinkers and said, close your eyes and look at 2006 and tell us what life is going to be like. And being the transportation person who was asking, I said, oh my God, trips are going to, no congestion, cut in half, telecommunications, work at home, freight, all those things that happen, and all that free time now, we travel more, we just don't go to work. right? We don't stay home. So even with the advantages that we have, and we have made some progress, this 70% increase, think about that. You're doing 70% more traveling now than you did, what? It's a frightening, no reason that VMT is increasing faster than our population. There's a lot of numbers. Let me just point you to one, the fact that we have a 234% increase in congestion with a 28% increase in population. Another way to think about us and our mobility and how much we're consuming relative to transportation. I talked about a new issue here, and I referenced it. I want to talk about this notion of fragmentation in the Southeast. We have 6 states, parts of Florida, 534 counties in the 6-state area, PAM, Megaregion, 4,400 in cities, and I'm going to ask Chick and Mayor Franklin to coordinate all of those.
Well, we just added 2 more.
Oh, I don't
More to come.
We
already have 4,000. What's 2 more?
The point is, when we talk about the challenges working across, I don't want to paint an easy picture, a naive picture. That's the reality. That's our political reality. That's our geographic reality. Doesn't mean the problem doesn't need to get solved at a different level, but that's what we're confronting. And I think that's a really good way to sort of frame it to help you think about how challenging that really could be. Okay, a little bit on the let's talk strategy, just a bit for successful solutions. I start with this notion of a holistic approach, and I'm quickly becoming a proponent of what we call spatial planning, as it's been defined in Europe, because it's one of those tools that helps you go from the very small to the very, very big. It deals with space. You can deal with order of magnitude. But when we talk about visioning, I talked about a holistic approach, and I talked about a multi-sectoral approach. We're talking mobility, natural resources, green space, housing, all those things that mean a high quality of life and a quality place, because that's what turns in the 21st century. People who can choose to live anywhere do it, whether they want to choose, where they got a high quality of life, it's a nice place to live, efficient government, they can get in and out, and there are ways that they can entertain themselves. I talk about a mega region, the global economy, and then I say, well, what does that mean for my neighborhood? And I ask you, what regional, global economy, mega region, what does that mean for your neighborhood? That's the challenge. The time that we make the argument that you have to focus regionally, mega regional, you can't forget the fact that it all starts in neighborhoods. And I go particularly small. I could have stopped at the city, but I stop at the neighborhood because this notion of scale and focusing on all these issues has to happen up and down the ladder. Nobody, no place, no size, no place can be excluded because it's too small to be considered. And so this notion of neighborhood to the globe, from where you live to the rest of the world, is a part of our challenge in terms of place and scale. Today, 2050, and looking further into the future, so we talked a multiplicity of issues. We've talked scale from the neighborhood to global, and now we're talking temporal from today and 2050 and beyond. We say 2050, 2030, 2020, our future is now for us. I have been astonished at the extent to which the nature of our challenges are becoming so chronic that we're being crippled because we can't move. We're being crippled because our educational system isn't what it needs to be to maintain the kind of competitiveness that made us a world leader and a leader in the United States. If you look at the South, the fact that everybody wants to be here, it's because obviously we've done some things right. My worry is, how do you keep doing that? How do we make sure that happens? Okay, let me get out on a limb here a little bit. I would argue that what we do now has outgrown its effectiveness. That the way that we look at infrastructure planning, our procurement process and construction processes certainly are dysfunctional. Worked good maybe when we thought about 1950, worked pretty good for 25 or 30, 40 years, broken. Broken, and we have to do a better job of figuring out how we are going to re-energize that in our productivity in that regard. I'm going to give you an example later that tells you how important that is. So Megaregion calls for a broader vision and planning framework, and it says that we got to evolve. Planning approaches ought to evolve over the time. One of the major criticisms, I think, if you look at transportation planning, travel demand forecasting, and modeling, we started that in 1950 Chicago area transportation study. We haven't improved it a whole lot. Not a whole lot. Some. Technology has helped us, no doubt, but the basic concepts have been constant over time. But the challenge that we have here is that geography has changed so much. We've got to think about how we take those tools and allow them to be useful in this new environment, a basic paradigm shift